rain hammered the marble steps of the Kang mansion in Gangnam, and Elena Brooks stood in the middle of the grand entrance hall with her life folded into a single suitcase. 4 immigration officers surrounded her. Their umbrellas dripped onto the imported Italian floor. She kept looking from their faces to the door, waiting for someone to tell her this was a mistake, waiting for the world to make sense again. "Ma'am, your residency status is under review," one officer said, not unkindly. "We have orders to escort you to the airport within the hour." "There has to be an error," Elena said, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. "I'm married to Kang Tae-seok. My husband can clear this up in 5 minutes. Where is he? Someone get my husband!" As if summoned by her own desperation, footsteps sounded on the staircase. Elena's head snapped up, and for one glorious second, relief flooded through her chest so hard she nearly cried from it. "He's here! He'll fix this! He always fixes everything!" Tae-seok descended the stairs slowly, his face unreadable, a folder tucked beneath his arm. Elena took a step toward him. "Tae-seok, thank God. Tell them this is a mistake." He didn't answer. He walked past the officers, set the folder on the entrance table, and opened it. Divorce papers. Elena stared at the document as if it were written in a language she'd never learned. "Sign them," he said. "What?" "Sign them, Elena." She let out a small, disbelieving laugh, the kind that comes out when the brain refuses to process what the ears just heard. "I don't understand. What is this? What's happening?" That was when she heard it, the soft click of heels on the upstairs landing. Elena looked up, and everything inside her went cold and still. Yoon Seo-ah stood at the top of the staircase, wrapped in one of Tae-seok's white dress shirts, her dark hair loose over one shoulder, watching the scene below with the calm satisfaction of a woman who already knew how the story ended. Elena's eyes moved from Seo-ah down to her husband's cold, closed face, and something inside her chest simply broke. "You wanted Korea," Tae-seok said quietly. "I'm taking Korea away from you." "What have I done?" Elena's voice cracked. "Tae-seok, look at me. Tell me what I did. I deserve at least that." He said nothing. He wouldn't even meet her eyes. The officers stepped forward to collect her suitcase. Elena felt hands guiding her toward the door, felt the cold rain replacing the warmth of the house she had called home for 3 years. And through it all, her husband stood at the bottom of the stairs and let it happen. She would spend the next 5 years trying to understand how the man who once promised her the world could stand there in silence while strangers dragged her out of it. But to understand how they arrived at that terrible night, you have to go back 3 years, to a version of Tae-seok and Elena who still believed in each other completely. Back then, Elena didn't know that the quiet, serious man she kept running into at a small gallery event in Seoul controlled one of the most feared criminal organizations in the country. To her, he was simply Tae-seok, a man who rarely smiled, who chose his words like they cost him something, who watched everyone in a room like he was calculating the odds of betrayal before he'd even said hello. What drew him to her wasn't her beauty, though she was beautiful. It was that she wasn't afraid of him. She teased him when he was too serious. She told him bluntly when she thought he was wrong. And most importantly, in a world where everyone around him wanted something, money, protection, favors, position, Elena never asked him for anything at all. "You're the first person who's ever argued with me and not apologized for it afterward," he told her once, half amused, half stunned. "Would you like me to start?" She'd shot back, and he'd laughed, a real laugh, rare and unguarded, and something in his chest had shifted permanently that night. When he finally told her the truth about who he really was, about the empire he ran, about the blood that sometimes stained his hands even when his suits were spotless, Elena had gone quiet for a long time. She thought about walking away. She told him so, honestly, the way she told him everything. "I don't want a life where I'm afraid every time you leave the house," she said. Tae-seok had taken her hands in his, an act of vulnerability that cost him more than she ever knew, and said, "The only thing I will never allow this world to touch is you. I swear it." She believed him. She left her whole life behind, her friends, her career, her country, and moved across the world for a promise whispered in a dim apartment in Seoul. Against the objections of his family, against the warnings of his most trusted men, they married in a small, private ceremony. For a while, for a real, golden while, they were happy in a way neither of them had ever thought possible. But happiness, especially in Tae-seok's world, rarely stays undisturbed. At formal dinners, Elena began noticing the way conversations shifted to Korean the moment she entered a room, as if she were furniture rather than a wife. She noticed the sideways glances from Tae-seok's associates, the murmured comments that weren't murmured quite low enough, that a man of his position marrying a foreign woman made him look weak, made him look like a man led by his heart instead of his mind. She tried to let it roll off her. She told herself it didn't matter, that Tae-seok's love was the only opinion that counted. But Tae-seok himself began to change too. He came home later. His phone rang more. Deals collapsed one after another, and each time, the fingerprints of a leak inside his own organization became harder to ignore. Someone close to him was talking to his enemies. The suspicion ate at him quietly, turning him inward, turning him cold even toward Elena, who only wanted to hold him through it. "Talk to me," she would say, sitting across from him at dinner while his food went untouched and his eyes stayed fixed on his phone. "Whatever it is, let me help." "You can't help with this," he'd mutter, and leave the table. It was into this widening crack that Yoon Seo-ah returned. She had been Tae-seok's lover once, years before Elena, back when their family's business interests had first begun circling each other like sharks testing for weakness. She was Korean. She was powerful. She was the daughter of a rival crime family, and in the eyes of everyone around Tae-seok, she was exactly the kind of woman a man like him should have married. Her father made the proposal directly. Unite the two families. Two empires combined into one unstoppable force, sealed with a marriage between Tae-seok and Seo-ah. All Tae-seok had to do was leave his American wife. "Never," Tae-seok said flatly, the first time it was suggested. "Elena is my wife. That conversation is over before it starts." But conversations like that are rarely over just because one man says so. Seo-ah did not attack directly. She was too intelligent for something so obvious. Instead, she appeared. At business dinners, at private meetings, at family gatherings, Elena was invited to but never truly welcomed at. She was warm to Elena, disarmingly kind. She complimented Elena's dress, asked about her life in America, laughed at her jokes. "I only want peace between our families," Seo-ah told Tae-seok privately, her eyes lowered in practiced humility. "I respect your marriage completely." And all the while she watched. She noticed when Elena began slipping out of the mansion alone, offering vague excuses. She noticed the phone calls Elena took in another room, voice hushed. She began, quietly, to follow her. What Seo-ah didn't know, what nobody knew, was the truth behind those secret meetings. Weeks earlier, Elena had overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Park Min-jae, one of Tae-seok's most senior and trusted men, speaking in low tones on a phone call that had nothing to do with the business he claimed to be doing. A name mentioned that didn't belong in a loyal man's mouth. A number that didn't add up. Elena had no proof, only instinct, and a growing, sickening certainty that someone inside her husband's inner circle was planning to destroy him. She couldn't go to Tae-seok, not without evidence, not when accusing the wrong man could tip off the real traitor and put her husband's life in even greater danger. So she did the only thing she could think of. She found a lawyer with connections to a retired government investigator, a man who understood how to quietly build a case without alerting the people being investigated. She began meeting him, gathering documents, piecing together a picture that, if she was right, could save her husband's life and his empire. She was risking everything to protect the man she loved. And from a distance, through the lens of Seo-ah's camera, it looked exactly like betrayal. Seo-ah brought the photographs to Tae-seok one evening, laid them across his desk like a winning hand of cards. Elena entering an office building. Elena exchanging an envelope with a man in a suit. Elena sitting across from that same man at a quiet restaurant, heads bent close together. "I didn't want to be the one to show you this," Seo-ah said softly, her voice dripping with false reluctance. "But you deserve to know." Tae-seok stared at the photographs for a long time before he said anything. "Who is he?" he finally asked. "I don't know," Seo-ah lied, "but she's been meeting him for weeks." That night, Tae-seok came home and asked Elena, carefully, deliberately, where she had been that afternoon. "Shopping," Elena said. It was the first lie she had ever told him, and it would cost her everything. Tae-seok said nothing more that night, but something inside him had already begun to close like a fist. He remembered every warning his advisors had given him. He remembered every whispered comment about weakness and foreign wives. He began watching Elena the way he watched his enemies, carefully, coldly, cataloging every inconsistency. Seo-ah, sensing the crack widening, pressed harder. She produced financial documents, fabricated, though Tae-seok had no way of knowing that, suggesting Elena had been quietly moving money, preparing an exit. She showed him messages, also fake, that appeared to reveal Elena discussing his business dealings with an outsider. And then came the final blow. Word reached Tae-seok that immigration officials had flagged irregularities in Elena's original residency paperwork. Paperwork Seo-ah's father had quietly arranged to have reviewed. "What if she never loved you?" Seo-ah whispered one night, her hand resting gently on his arm in a way that felt like comfort, and was, in truth, a blade. "What if she only married you for what you could give her?" It was the one wound Tae-seok had never learned to protect. He could survive bullets. He had survived betrayal, war, the deaths of men he'd called brothers. But the idea that the one person who had ever truly seen him, not the Empire, not the fear, just him, might have been playing him all along, that was a humiliation he did not know how to carry. The night everything shattered began like any other. Elena had cooked dinner herself, something she rarely had time for anymore, because the lawyer had called that afternoon with extraordinary news. They finally had enough evidence. They finally knew, with certainty, who the traitor was. Tonight, she had decided, she would tell Tae-seok everything. Tonight, the nightmare of secrecy would end, and she would be able to look her husband in the eye without hiding anything from him ever again. But when Tae-seok walked through the door, he didn't sit down to eat. He stood in the doorway of the dining room, his coat still on, his eyes hollow in a way she had never seen before. "Did you marry me because you loved me?" he asked. Elena blinked, startled by the strange, flat coldness in his voice. "Of course I did." "Tae-seok, what's wrong? What happened?" "Answer the question again." "You know I did," she said, standing now, alarmed. "Tae-seok, you're scaring me. Talk to me." He pulled a photograph from his coat pocket and set it on the table between them. Elena looked down and felt her stomach drop. It was her, meeting the lawyer, exchanging documents. "Who is he?" Tae-seok demanded. This was the moment. She was so close to proving everything, so close to bringing him the truth wrapped in a bow, and she knew that if she said the wrong name too soon, if word got back to Park Min-jae that he was under investigation, he could disappear. Or worse, he could act first. "Give me 2 days," Elena said, her voice pleading. "I promise, I will explain everything. Just trust me for 2 more days." To Tae-seok, exhausted, humiliated, and half convinced already by weeks of careful poison, those words sounded like nothing but another lie stacked on top of the first. "Trust you," he repeated bitterly, and turned to leave. "Tae-seok, wait!" Elena followed him to the door, out into the cold night air, grabbing at his sleeve. "Please, please just trust me. I have never lied to you about anything that mattered. Please." He got into the car without another word. Elena stood on the steps in the dark, watching the tail lights disappear down the long driveway, and something in her chest told her, with terrible clarity, that she had just lost something she would never fully get back. That night, Tae-seok didn't go to a hotel. He did not go to his office. Angry, humiliated, and half-drunk on both alcohol and grief, he went to Seo-ah. And Seo-ah, who had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment, gave him exactly what he thought he needed. By morning, he had made his decision. He would remove Elena from his life before she had the chance to destroy him first. The rain-soaked scene in the entrance hall, the one that opened this story, was the result of that decision. A decision made in anger, in wounded pride, in the terrible arrogance of a powerful man who had let humiliation convince him that punishing his wife was the same thing as protecting himself. Elena stood at the door one last time before the officers let her out, and she looked at the man she had given up an entire life for. "After everything I gave up for you," she said, her voice trembling but her spine straight. "Is this really what you think of me?" Tae-seok said nothing. He couldn't. His silence was its own answer, and it was the cruelest one he could have given her. Then Seo-ah appeared at the top of the stairs again, and Elena understood, with a devastating finality, that another woman had already taken her place in the house she had once called home. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She looked only at her husband as she signed the divorce papers with a hand that barely shook. Then she slid her wedding ring off her finger and set it beside her signature, gently, like laying a flower on a grave. "One day," she said quietly, "you will discover the truth." Tae-seok looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "But when you do," Elena said, "don't come looking for me." The officers guided her out into the rain. At the car, she turned around one final time, some small, stubborn part of her still hoping, still praying, that he would run after her, that he would stop this, that he would choose her the way he'd promised he always would. He didn't move. The car pulled away, and that was the last time Tae-seok saw his wife for 5 long years. In the weeks that followed, Seo-ah moved into the mansion, into the life Elena had left behind. But Tae-seok found no peace in it. The house felt hollow in a way it never had before. Elena's laughter, which used to fill the halls even during his worst moods, was simply gone, replaced by a silence that pressed on him like a physical weight. Her books disappeared from the shelves one by one. Her perfume faded from the air. Still, Tae-seok told himself, again and again, that he had made the right decision. A man could not afford to be a fool for love, not in his world. Then Park Min-jae made his move. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night. Tae-seok walked into what he believed was a routine meeting with a business partner and found himself walking directly into an ambush. Gunfire erupted before he even understood what was happening. Several of his men fell in the crossfire. Tae-seok himself barely escaped with his life, a bullet grazing his shoulder as he fled through a service exit. In the chaos of the investigation that followed, his security team dug deep, deeper than they had ever dared before, into every corner of the organization. What they found made Tae-seok's blood run cold. Hidden bank transfers, encrypted communications, a trail of betrayal leading directly, unmistakably, to Park Min-jae, a man who had stood at Tae-seok's side for over a decade, who had eaten at his table, who had held his newborn nephew, who Tae-seok had trusted with his very life. And then, buried within the evidence his team uncovered, something else. Something that made Tae-seok's hands go numb as he read it. Elena had known. She had been investigating Park Min-jae for months before her deportation. The immigration lawyer wasn't a lover, wasn't a threat, wasn't anything close to what Seo-ah had painted him to be. He was helping Elena gather evidence, carefully, safely, in a way that wouldn't tip off the very man now confirmed to be plotting Tae-seok's downfall. Every secret meeting Seo-ah had used to poison Tae-seok's mind had, in fact, been part of Elena's desperate, quiet mission to save his life. Tae-seok refused to believe it. He read the files 3 times, 4 times, searching for some alternative explanation, some way to make the truth less unbearable. But the dates matched. The photographs, when placed beside the real evidence, told an entirely different story than the one Seo-ah had shown him. The recordings confirmed it beyond any doubt. His wife had never betrayed him. She had risked her freedom, her safety, her entire life in a country not her own, to protect a man who, in return, had slept with another woman, humiliated her in front of his entire household, signed divorce papers behind her back, and had her forcibly removed from the country like something disposable. Alone in his office that night, the most feared man in Seoul, a man who had never once broken in front of another living soul, put his head in his hands and wept. He ordered his men to find her immediately. It should have been simple. He had resources most governments would envy. But Elena's old phone number rang dead. Her previous address had new tenants who had never heard the name Elena Brooks. Her old friends, when his men finally tracked them down, refused to say a single word. Their loyalty to her ironclad in a way his own had never been. He sent people abroad, chasing rumors and half leads across 3 continents. He wrote emails that went unanswered. He sent messages through every mutual contact he could find, and every single one came back to him unread, unacknowledged, swallowed into silence. Finally, after weeks of relentless searching, one of Elena's old friends sent back a response. Not from Elena herself, just 4 words, cold and final. She said, "Leave her alone." Something in Tae-seok broke fully that day, in a way the ambush and the betrayal of Park Min-jae never had. He turned to Seo-ah, standing in his office where she had made herself comfortable in the months since Elena's departure, and dismantled everything. The marriage alliance her father had engineered, the business ties, all of it. He removed her from his life with the same coldness she had once used to remove Elena from it. Seo-ah begged him to reconsider, to forgive her, insisting that everything she had done had come from love. Tae-seok looked at her with nothing but exhaustion in his eyes. "You only showed me the door," he told her quietly. "I was the one who chose to walk through it." It was an important distinction, and one he made not to excuse Seo-ah, but because he needed, more than anything, to be honest with himself. Seo-ah had lied. Seo-ah had manipulated, but it was Tae-seok who had chosen not to trust his wife. It was Tae-seok who had let his pride decide for him. It was Tae-seok who had chosen another woman's comfort over his own wife's desperate pleas. And it was Elena who had paid the price for every one of his failures. 5 years passed. Tae-seok's empire grew larger, stronger, more feared than ever. He crushed the remnants of Park Min-jae's betrayal with ruthless efficiency, expanded his territory, multiplied his wealth several times over. Men who once whispered that he was weak for marrying a foreign woman now spoke his name in hushed, fearful tones. But the mansion remained empty in every way that mattered. He never remarried. Women came and went through his life, beautiful, accomplished, ambitious women who would have given anything to be Mrs. Kang. He compared every single one of them to Elena, and none of them ever came close. Some nights, he would find himself standing in the room where Elena used to read for hours by the window, sunlight catching the pages of whatever novel she'd been lost in that week. Some nights, he could almost smell dinner cooking in the kitchen, could almost hear her laughter drifting down the hallway, could almost feel her hand reaching for his the way it used to. And some nights, the worst nights, he remembered exactly how she had looked standing in the rain, begging him to trust her, and how he had simply driven away. His greatest punishment was never that Elena hated him. It was that he no longer knew anything about her life at all. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know if she was happy. He didn't know if, in some quiet moment, she ever thought of him the way he thought of her, every single day, without fail. For 5 years, one question haunted him without mercy. If he ever saw her again, would she give him even a single chance to explain? He got his answer in Paris. Tai Siak had traveled there for an international business summit. Older now, quieter, colder in the eyes of everyone who dealt with him, though the fire that had once burned so brightly for one woman had never fully gone out beneath the ice. After a long afternoon of meetings, he walked through the marble corridors of the hotel, hosting the summit, his mind elsewhere, when the sound of applause drifted out from a nearby conference hall. He glanced toward the open doors out of idle curiosity, and stopped completely. A woman stood on the stage, having just finished delivering what was clearly a powerful speech, judging by the standing ovation rising around her. For a moment, Tae-seok was certain his exhausted mind was playing a cruel trick on him. But it was her. It was truly, unmistakably Elena. She looked different, not just older, but transformed in a way that went far beyond the passage of time. She stood with a quiet, unshakable confidence he had never seen in her before, not even in their happiest days together. Business leaders surrounded her the moment she stepped off the stage, eager for a word, a handshake, a moment of her attention. She didn't need his name to open doors for her anymore. She didn't need his money, his protection, his empire. He learned within minutes, from overheard conversations around him, exactly who she had become. The founder and CEO of a thriving international company, a woman respected across industries he barely understood, a woman who had built an entire empire of her own from the wreckage of the one he had destroyed her with. Tae-seok stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. Then, as if some invisible thread still connected them after all these years, Elena's eyes lifted and found his across the room. Her smile, warm, bright, professional, vanished instantly. For one long second, the past rushed back into the space between them, 5 years collapsing into a single breath. Then, deliberately, calmly, Elena looked away and turned to speak with someone else, as though he were simply another stranger in a crowded room. It hurt him more than if she had screamed his name and struck him across the face. He followed her when she finally slipped out of the hall, catching up to her in a quiet corridor away from the noise of the summit. Elena. She stopped walking, but didn't turn around right away. When she finally did, her expression was composed, guarded, unreadable in a way that terrified him more than any rage would have. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling out before he could organize them into anything more coherent. "Elena, I know the truth now. I know everything. I know what you were doing, what you sacrificed to try to protect me, and I know," Elena said simply. He blinked, thrown off balance. "You know? I heard, years ago, that Park Min-jae had been exposed." Her voice was steady, almost detached. "News like that travels, even to people who've left. Then why didn't you contact me?" The question came out more desperate than he intended. Elena tilted her head slightly, studying him. Why would I? The simplicity of the question hit him harder than any accusation could have. "I never remarried," he said, as if that fact alone could rebuild 5 years of ruin. "I've thought about you every single day since you left." "That was your choice," Elena replied evenly. "Not my responsibility." Something in Tae-seok's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. This was a man who had never once begged another human being for anything in his entire life. Not for mercy, not for loyalty, not even for his own survival in the face of enemies, with guns pointed at his chest. But standing in that quiet Parisian hallway, he began to beg. "I chose power over you once," he said, his voice breaking in a way that startled even him. "I won't make that mistake again. I'll leave Korea. I'll walk away from everything. The business, the money, all of it. None of it means anything without you." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and for one fragile heartbeat, hope flickered dangerously in his chest. "You already made your choice," she said quietly. "I was wrong. I know. I can change." "I know that too," Elena said, and something almost gentle crossed her face. "I believe you." Hope surged in him again, and he took a step closer. "Then let me. But I don't want you anymore." The words landed like a physical blow, silencing him completely. The corridor seemed to grow colder, quieter, emptier. "Did you ever love me?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena's composure wavered for just a moment, her eyes glistening. "More than I should have." "Then how can you walk away so easily?" "Easily?" Her voice rose slightly, the first real crack of emotion breaking through 5 years of careful distance. "You think this is easy for me? I stood in our home while strangers packed my entire life into one suitcase, Tae-seok. I looked at you one last time before that car drove away, praying that you would run after me, that you would stop them, that you would choose me. And you did nothing. You just stood there and watched them take me." Tears finally slipped down her face, though her voice never lost its steadiness. "You didn't lose me today," she said. "You lost me 5 years ago, the night I begged you to trust me, and you chose to believe another woman instead." He reached for her hand, desperate, unwilling to let the moment slip away without one more attempt. Elena stepped back before his fingers could reach hers. "You made your choice," she said softly. "Now I've made mine." "Is there truly nothing I can do?" he asked, his voice cracking on the final word. Elena looked at him for a long moment, at the man she had once loved enough to abandon an entire life for, the man whose child she might have raised, whose name she had once been proud to carry. "No," she said simply. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps steady and unhurried on the marble floor, disappearing into the crowded lobby beyond. This time, Tae-seok did not follow. He simply stood there, alone in the corridor, and watched the last piece of his old life vanish completely. She had arrived in Korea years earlier, believing he was her entire future. She had left with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. But from the ruins of the life he had destroyed, she had built something that belonged entirely, unshakably to her. Something no man, no empire, no amount of regret could ever take away again. And standing alone in that Parisian hallway, Kang Tae-seok finally understood the full, unbearable weight of the truth. He could give up his empire. He could surrender every last cent of his fortune. He could spend the rest of his life drowning in regret for what he had done. None of it would undo the single moment that had cost him everything. The moment Elena had begged him, with everything she had, to simply believe her, and he had chosen someone else instead. 5 years earlier, he had watched immigration officers lead his wife away in the rain, and believed, in his arrogance, that she was the one losing everything that night. Now, standing alone in a foreign city, watching her disappear into a crowd that adored her, he finally understood the truth. Elena had rebuilt her life from nothing. She had found peace without him. She had moved forward, stronger and freer, than she had ever been within the walls of his mansion. The only person who had truly lost everything that rainy night was him. And this time, there would be no going back. This time, she was gone forever. If this story moved you, don't scroll away just yet. Let us know what you think of Tae-seok and Elena down in the comments. Do you think he deserved a second chance, or did Elena make the right choice walking away? Give this video a like if you felt every bit of that heartbreak. Subscribe for more stories just like this one, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.